thank you so much for having us and an opportunity for us to talk about the Microsoft open source story. I'm going to start with a narrative. In fact, this is my personal experience with a startup in India. They're called Hug Innovations. In fact, when we met them 6 months back, they didn't have a name for that startup. They were just about to kickstart it, and we met them. And the first question they asked is, hey, we need help. We're going to go on the cloud. So when we started talking to them, and when we sat across the table, it was very evident that when they put across their enterprise blueprint, it was all open source, 100% open source. And they were not ready to tell us what they're up to in terms of what they want to do. You know, if you look at their vision, absolutely, so they want to, humanize the wearable technology, and we didn't know what they were doing, and because under IP, they didn't want to share. And we got talking, and we also socialized Azure in a big way. One of the areas that they felt it had immense value to them was, ingester. For example, when it comes to wearable devices, by the way, the wearable devices, they're going to launch it in the next 3 months, hence I'm able to talk about them. And when they sell in thousands and millions of devices, so end of today, they also address women's safety in India. So in that context, when the device sends heartbeats every 30 seconds, imagine the number of messages that are going to hit their servers. So they had built a small ingester, which probably could scale up to, let's say, 50,000 messages per second kind of a thing, but they're looking at a very large scalable ingester. So that's when we recommended, hey, why don't you look at Event Hub, which is a large scale event ingester in the cloud. So they felt out of their landscape, which is complete open source, they're okay to plug out their own proprietary ingester and leverage Event Hub. Okay, you're going to see a demo in a little while from now, but that's a new heterogeneity in the cloud in terms of having your own software as well as leveraging some services. Now, having used that, I think they were delighted in terms of, hey, even ingester works for us because end of the day, I don't have to worry about the number of messages I'm going to ingest onto my services. That was a good news for them. But after that, what happened was, as Microsoft, we've given two options in terms of pulling information from the ingester, which is Event Hub. So we've given a C#-based, consumer as well as Apache Storm. We support both of them. But they wanted a Java-based stream processor. Yeah. Now we also tried to push, hey, there's ready code of C#. Why don't you use it? But knowing them, obviously, they've been working in Java for almost a decade, and there was some reluctance, which is obvious. And we said, hey, give us few days, we'll get back to you. And trust me, we went back to the product team. By the way, so Event Hub on Azure, we support HTTPS and AMQP protocol. So you can build your own consumer as well. Went back to the product team, and we literally turned back with a Java-based event processor in about 4 days' time, right? That was unimaginable for me as an individual. I've been at Microsoft for about a decade now, never seen such an agility on the ground, right? When you come across statements like this, by the way, so this is something which a CEO said in one of the excellent event. It also was reflective of, hey, how we change as a company. And we've seen a lot of posters inside Microsoft of, we love Linux, we love open source to a greater extent, but what we did on the ground, my personal experience in terms of dealing with the ISV and giving them what they want in their own terms in less than 4 days was absolutely a manifestation of where we have come as a company. So I'm putting this slide just to not to put another slide in my 25 slides, but we feel it today in terms of, hey, when we say we love Linux, we truly love Linux because at the end of the day, we are responsive to customers' needs, we are responsive to operate in their own terms, in your terms, literally, and help you succeed in the cloud. You must have also seen quite a few statements released in the press. People might call it, hell frozen over, or plague flew overhead. They may call, what are they called? But at the end of the day, I can openly say with some authority that we have changed the company, right? We're not the same company. I can say this with authority because I've spent a decade at Microsoft. When I joined, it was a different ballgame altogether. There was so much proprietariness within Microsoft. And today, all that we're doing is in the context of open source. I'm also happy to say that yesterday night, we had a Kinect Event, which is basically a developer event, which is an annual event, specifically for developers in the tooling from Visual Studio standpoint. We open sourced so many things yesterday. Believe it or not, C#, which is our proprietary language, which is probably world's 4th or 5th most used programming language, we open source that. That's what's pushed to Git yesterday night, and contributions are welcome as well. And we also had I don't know how many of you know, we released our IDE, which is mostly, I would say it's a editor called Visual Studio Code, which runs on OS X and Linux. We open source that as well. So quite a few things opened yesterday night. It was definitely a significant day for us. Now, while I'm saying all this, it's not something that we overnight switch to open source. No, we're probably seeing the momentum in the last 24 months for sure, after our CEO Satyanarayana had taken over, and it's probably, timing was great that a lot of stuff, a lot of hard work that has happened in the last 1 decade has probably come on the pedestal. And it probably, I also go back to my programming days wherein .NET was dominant, Java was dominant. They were all going in parallel, head on. And those are the days when people really question, hey, why have my component built in Java, I have my component built in .NET, why can't they communicate, right? The answer to that was, hey, use web services, right? That's definitely open standards, but definitely, instills latency, instills performance issues, etc. But we wanted native bridges to be made available. As Microsoft, we definitely promoted that. We had partners build .NET Java bridges. If you look at other streams of work we've done as Microsoft, so PHP, right? So now that's something which we've been working for almost 4 to 5 years, and we made PHP perform really well on Windows. That's also been a significant work in that area. And lastly, if you look at, there's some announcements that we've done in these, I'll talk about that. But these days, every event that happens for Microsoft, or we partnering with our industry practitioners in the open source world, we have some announcement that we make. Now, Moodle is the latest one, wherein we have kind of partnered with them, made it available in Azure. That's also going on really well. But all I'm trying to say is the work we're doing as Microsoft in the open source world, it's not something new. We've been working, probably behind the scenes, but this come to mainstream. It's more visible today in terms of our workloads that we have released in the open source. Now, this is the culmination of everything. In fact, I must also say this, open source has accelerated Azure's adoption of Microsoft's open source. Yeah, because when we say Azure is the most open, flexible, and broad platform, it is because there's no boundary, honestly. If you as a company, and if you want to seamlessly move on to the cloud, there's no better way to for you to operate in a very familiar environment. So our job is to make it very familiar for you. Our job is to make sure that you operate at your own terms, not compromise on some of the services that we probably offer as services. Now, the big question is, why is Microsoft doing this, right? We've been talking about open source. We've been promoting so much open source. I said earlier, we open source our own frameworks. By the way, I'm not sure how many of you know, .NET Core has been open source. It was open source exactly a year back. On the same day, that's a coincidence, November 18th, it was 19th, but 18th last year is when we announced open sourcing of .NET Core. That means .NET as a framework was made available on OS X as well as Linux. Yeah. Yesterday, we did release candidate of that. That means you can go to production today, starting on OS X and Linux platforms. That means, we're going to see a demo from Abhishek in a little while from now, but end of the day, if you have a web workload and you want a choice in terms of whether I should push it on Windows or Linux, you have it today, right? A lot of the times people said ASP.NET, I'm using that, but my infrastructure team is saying, can you push it on Linux? That was not reality earlier, it is reality today. Now the question is, why is Microsoft doing this? And definitely, I want to answer, I'm here to literally answer that question in terms of how we are progressing. In fact, this is also, I would say, it's for me, as an individual working at Microsoft for 10 years, it also brings back a lot of, I can probably say this better than anybody else who spent probably less than 2-3 years in Microsoft in terms of how we've transformed as a company. So it comes across 4 different buckets here. So our open source story at Microsoft is grouped under these 4 elements: enable, integrate, release, and contribute. Okay. And by the way, to the question of why is Microsoft doing this, it's definitely a great business proposition, right? It's a good business decision in terms of embracing open source. And at this juncture, I also want to say this quote. I think our CEO said this. In the consumer world, by the way, all I'm going to talk about is commercial software, etc. But in the consumer world, Outlook client, right? Outlook client is the most productive, most sophisticated client on iOS for Google Mail, for Gmail, right? That's where we're making a difference. For us, there's no boundary as a company. We don't really worry about whether is it ours, is it theirs. And yesterday was also momentous because we also partnered with Google. Google came on stage and spoke about how they're working on the next version of AngularJS, right? in partnership with Microsoft, because we own TypeScript. We open source TypeScript ever since its inception. Now they're using TypeScript and Visual Studio Code, which is an editor, to improvise AngularJS. That was a, I would say, icing on the cake in terms of our stance in open source. Let me take a shot at enable first, right? Now this logo wall you're seeing, this is definitely not a, I would say, it doesn't have all the logos here, but a true representation of most of the most popular frameworks and utilities and tools and infrastructure in the open source world. Now, you might have a lot of solutions being built from the ground up in terms of some infrastructure, some application frameworks, as well as it can be DevOps, anything that you use. Azure supports all of these today, right? There's no boundary in terms of, hey, you cannot do this, you can't do that. Absolutely open. You can take as is, it's natively supported. I'll give a few examples as I go along, and there's no boundary, honestly. A couple of logos are missing, I'm going to talk about that. This slide is probably 3 days old, but I'm going to add one more logo a little later. Now, it is not just Azure, honestly, right? Because as I said earlier, we've been working literally for over a decade now in supporting open source. It probably were not visible earlier, it's visible now. Our, in terms of System Center is our an operation management suite, as well as if you look at other Hyper-V for that matter, we've been supporting Linux there as well. And in terms of virtual machines in the cloud, it goes without saying, ever since we've kind of released Azure as an open cloud, public cloud, we've been supporting Linux. Probably the variant came a little later, but the support was always there. Talking about the web workload, that's the most popular workloads in the open cloud. Now, PHP, I said, we've been working to make sure it runs really well on Windows. PHP, Node, Java, Python, as well as .NET. We have native support for those languages in the cloud. That means if you have a web workload, if you want to push it to cloud, you don't have to worry. We support natively. In fact, I have a couple of snapshots I'm going to show up with that. Data analytics stream, if you look at Hadoop, right? We call it HD Insight. Hadoop's variant on Azure is called HD Insight. We've been supporting that natively. In fact, 6 months back, people questioned us, hey, you have HD Insight, which is Hadoop on Azure, but you only support Windows, right? 3 months later, we announced support for Linux clusters on Azure, right? Now, the stance may be in the direction in terms of supporting everything, but it comes in bits and pieces. But end of the day, we believe in complete the story. We believe in giving you a full story in terms of ensuring you build your workloads in Azure. There's a long list, honestly, in terms of what we're supporting. But end of the day, why? It is about familiarity. It is about ensuring that we support the tools and skills that you have already, right? Tools that you use today, and be productive in the cloud using the same stuff, right? Docker is a great example here, honestly. We support Docker and Windows and Linux both. You'll see a demo a little while from now, but that's also a great example of how we're supporting and embraced open source in a big way. Just so that you know, 1 in 4 virtual machines in Azure runs on Linux, right? And 1 out of 4 application that runs on our app servers, which is a web workload, is a non.NET workload. Yeah, so it speaks volume of how much of inroads were made in this journey to support open source in the cloud. This is a snapshot. I could not, we have issues in terms of connecting laptops on the podium. So this is a snapshot I took just to show you the options you have, right? So when you choose, HD Insight Hadoop variant on the cloud, we definitely have Windows and Linux as an option. You don't have, early it was not there, it was only Windows, but now Linux has come in. Web app, look at the option there. I can absolutely configure my environment in terms of the version of software as well as the host as well. If you look at, I've chosen Java there, hence it is probably thrown in Jetty and Tomcat, etc., different variants. And that's the flexibility we're giving, and it's all wizard driven, right? So you can absolutely use command line for sure, but you also have an option to use wizard. Now this is where I want to pause and welcome my colleague Abhishek Narayan for us to witness a couple of workloads in Azure, and he's going to take us through 2 workloads. One is hosting. I spoke about ASP.NET workloads on Linux. He's going to show that, as well as an interesting IoT scenario. So over to you, Abhishek.
Thanks, Sandeep. Hi guys. Okay, so I'll run you through a quick demo. So what I have in front of me is a Mac, and yes, it's a Mac. And what we'll do here is last year we open sourced the .NET Server Stack, and what I wanted to show here is how you quickly set up an ASP.NET site host that on Mac, or host that on a Linux machine, on a Linux server, anywhere. I'll show you that. But the cool part is now there are few new concepts. So if you're not aware of ASP.NET, you never need to worry. How many of you use Node.js? So you know how Node works, right? Self-host. So it hosts itself. You don't need a web server. It's all pretty cool. On similar lines, we have ASP.NET 5. So this is the learning that we also took from the community and created this beautiful ASP.NET 5. So I'll use a Yeoman generator here on Mac. So I'm going to run a command line over here, which is going to be your ASP.NET using gulp. Now, what you see here is, I'll just read it out. I think it's too small, but you have an option of empty application, console application, which can run in the background without a head, web application, which will have auth providers in it, inbuilt in it. That's the cool part of ASP.NET, so you get all those things pre-built in it. And then you have web application without those providers, a very lightweight version, Nancy ASP.NET application. These are some things taken from open source world, or you can just create a class library, unit test project, or a web API as well. It's like a REST API, which you can create from ASP.NET. So I'm going to use a basic ASP.NET application, name it OSI days demo. And now what it does, what you see here, it generates the generator which I've used. It generates all the views. Basically, it follows the MVC pattern, so you will see all the views here in the CS/HTML. And then I am just going to go to the folder OSI days demo, and then I can actually go and see all the files. You have the controllers, you have the Docker file, you have views, gulp file, and then you have a www root folder where your all code goes into. But the cool part, which you got to see here, is you have a Docker file, which means you can absolutely deploy the same app on Linux using Docker over here. So you can do all the configurations right here. What I will now do is I will just do a DNU restore. What happens here is there's a .NET runtime, which is cross-platform. So I'm using that. Restore will restore all the files, all the libraries that are part of the package.json file over there, and restore those files. So it's all done. And then I can just do DNX web, which is my, I'm saying, run this particular website using the self-host. So it's all running now. Now I go here, localhost 5000, here you go. So you have the ASP.NET right now running on Mac. It can run on Linux as well. You can use Docker. You can deploy it on a Linux VM. And the cool part now is, since you guys haven't worked on ASP.NET, one of the things was recompiling the application while you modify stuff. Now, the cool part here is you don't really need to do that. And you have a very cool editor, which is free of cost, which is Visual Studio Code. So right now you see About page, just says About here. What I'm going to do here is, let's fire, I didn't open, let me just close this guy for a second and open the tool, which is Visual Studio Code. So what you see here is Visual Studio Code. In the meantime, just let me run the stuff back. Okay, so now what we do is, our website's available here. I'll just do a refresh, right? It's all About page. It's all working fine. Now, we will use this beautiful code editor, which supports Node.js, PHP, Python. You can try it out with everything, integrates with Git. So I can push the code on the Git as well using this. And I go into my views, which basically generates the HTML. And I can go into the About view and just set from OSI days and just do save. And I'm done. When I refresh this website, you will see the changes here, just like you do in HTML, but it's actually ASP.NET Server running here, right? Which is one cool stuff. A lot of redeployments will not be required now on with ASP.NET 5, which is one real nice thing for enterprises as well. So that was from the ASP.NET side. What I have also done is, later on, maybe you will see, is what we are doing is we have created a small feedback page using ASP.NET 5, which works on Linux, Mac, and we have hosted on our Azure PaaS service, which is Azure Websites, and you guys can actually snap the QR and actually access that. Now, I will switch to another demo, which is another interesting one, and actually we have a session on this, which is by Saurabh Kirtani on IoT, in the IoT track. Okay, so I have a Raspberry Pi here, and I have a node, so we have used Python over here, Python 2.7, and we have the library, so we have just used Azure.ServiceBus and imported Service Bus service. Now, what Sandeep talked about earlier was Events Hub, and he talked about Hug Innovations, how they used in Events Hub. I'll show you a scenario how generally IoT architecture uses Events Hub. Now, in IoT, what the problem is, you have multiple sensors. So take a scenario of sensors, very common scenario, but just it's good to learn because we can kind of pollute the whole data there. So imagine we have millions of sensors across different regions, and now we are putting those data of the sensors onto some cloud service. It can be a REST API. Scalability will be a question mark. Events Hub is ingest huge number of data. So if you have used Kafka before, you would be familiar to this technology. Now, this is using the SDK over here and sending this data to the cloud. And on the cloud, what I'm doing is I'm using a service called Stream Analytics. So on the cloud, this is the Azure portal. Here, what you see is I have set up a quick Stream Analytics job. Now, this is like a near real-time streaming. If you want to run query on top of that, event processing, you want to do that, you can absolutely use this event processor. So this is ingesting a lot of data for temperature, humidity, luminosity, and stuff like that. It's coming up here, and this guy, if you see, if I just refresh this, you will see a stat here, which means data is coming in, and Stream Analytics is actually, this is the monitor where you can actually see if the data is coming in and stuff like that. So it is coming in. Now, what I have done on top of that was Events Hub ingesting the data, giving that data to a real-time processor, which is near real-time processor, which is Stream Analytics, again a PaaS service, and it's pretty simple. So if I have to write a small query to actually see this UI, what I'm doing in this UI, it's a real moving graph, and you can actually use a full screen as well. So this is created using Power BI, and it's real time. So as soon the data gets in, I'm using a tumbling window condition. So saying keep monitoring the data of every 5 seconds, and then run the query which I want you to run. So that's what this guy does. Now, what query we are running here is a very simple SQL database kind of a query, and we are actually, since we get the data in JSON file, we will lose the integer or float and stuff like that. So just casting that back to float, temperature and humidity fields, which I'm getting it back. All these things are set up in the input. This is just the query which I'm running here. And then I'm casting this as temp and humidity, which I'm using it in the Power BI dashboard data set. So this will generate a data set, which will go on a Power BI dashboard. I can just click on that and start configuring all the data that I want, right? So I'm getting these data into an output, Power BI from the input, and I'm using a timestamp. So this is how I can set up a tumbling window, saying I can set up a timestamp, and I can group the data which comes in based on a tumbling window. SS, 5 is basically a 5-second tumbling window, which is set up here. Okay, cool. So this was the demo. Actually, we'll show this more in the IoT track. You can come down there, and we'll actually build the whole stuff right there. So thank you. Back to you, Sandeep.
We'll move on from here. So we spoke about how we're enabling it. Now, this is a summary of what you just showed. Moving on, let's talk integration. So this is something which was much anticipated. In fact, this news came in 3 weeks back, and there's been a lot of goodness in the cloud after this has happened. Yeah, when it comes to Azure. Now, this partnership is unique for the first time, because when I say integration, I would say this is a classic manifestation of what we mean by integration with Azure, with Microsoft. Now, you will definitely have a lot of investments on premise, and today we have a choice. Based on this partnership, you have a choice when you use Red Hat Enterprise Linux in terms of either pushing your applications to on-premise or Azure. That's the option you have here. More than that, you have license mobility. That means subscriptions are valid for on-premise and the cloud as well. The last one, which is probably unique according to me, is support. End of the day, when we are saying it's an open cloud, there's no boundary, honestly, right, in terms of what we support, what we don't support. And when customers have problems in their workloads not running or running slow or something wrong in the cloud, you need right people to talk to you and help you resolve those issues. That's where the co-located support also come into picture. That means if we have, engineers from Red Hat all sitting with Microsoft, and the same happens with Red Hat as well. So that means if you make a call to support, doesn't matter whether your workload is on-premise or Azure, you will get support. That's something very unique with this partnership. Now, when it comes to integration, while we build a lot of services. For example, if you look at Azure, we definitely have a significant number of platform and service offerings, right? Event Hub is one such stuff, wherein you don't need to worry about virtual machine or compute. End of the day, you just plug into some of the service which is giving you that scale as well as elasticity. Now, Data Lake is basically, I would say, it's a repository in terms of storing large scale and structured, unstructured information. Now, while we've enabled the service, we've kind of integrated that with HDFS, right? Distributed file system from Hadoop, and we also support Yarn there. So that's the beauty of Azure today. While we are trying to offer services, there's always an integration with open source happening, right? Another great example is Redis Cache. Honestly, when Azure went on the road, in fact, from the caching technology standpoint, we had our own managed cache, right? It was there, in the cloud for almost a year. Later, based feedback from customers and partners, we said, you know what? While supporting managed cache, we really want as a memcache Redis cache, and we felt that Redis is the most popularly used open source caching technology, and we made that as our mainstream cache offering in the cloud. So Redis is a first-class citizen. Redis is a mainstream caching technology on Azure, and here you need to install Redis honestly. So it's also it's a managed server. That means you can decide how many nodes you want in terms of HA and DR, and it works seamlessly. In fact, the last month we released a premium tier on Redis cache. That means, this is all in memory, right? So if something goes wrong with that node, your data is lost. You have to repopulate that particular cache. But with the premium tier, we also giving you an option for it to automatically be repopulated, right? You don't have to worry about repopulating your cache. It happens. That's a premium tier offering. So the point I'm trying to make here is, end of the day, there is popular softwares out there, and we don't want you to come onto Azure compromising that, right? So we are absolutely making sure you take the same softwares and run seamlessly in the cloud. That's the second reason why we are making sure that it works seamlessly on cloud. And the third one is release. I mentioned a few examples earlier in terms of how we are open sourcing most of our software. We also have today, as I said earlier, you can absolutely go to production with that same example Abhishek showed in terms of having your ASP.NET workload running on Linux or OS X. That's something which is remarkable according to me, because eventually it is about making sure you have a choice in terms of the partner and the hosting environment that you can choose. Now moving on, there's a long list of, I would say, significant releases we've done over a period of time. We also open source Roslyn, a compiler framework. If you look at Python tools for VS, yes, in fact, the Python interpreter was written for Windows some time back as well. Now, the documentation on Azure, it's available in Git, right? So azure.com and technical document as well as articles, they're all available in Git. And more than that, in the last 1 year, ever since we open source .NET Core, there are about 7,000 stars in Git, and I would say close to 1,200 repos of folks of that repository, and close to 800 commits, out of which 20% are outside of Microsoft. By the way, so when I say this commits and changes, we have also vibrant community within Microsoft. We also have a significant number of, I would say, employees who only know open source, right? MS OpenTech, which is an independent group of Microsoft, is an evidence of how we work on open source. But eventually, we have a vibrant ecosystem within Microsoft doing open source technologies. Okay. So at this point, I want to welcome Ujjwal. I mentioned Docker earlier. I think that's the best, another example of how we are literally going ahead in terms of supporting microservices, making sure, again, on your own terms, right? So you might use Docker in terms of container model and trying to push that on Windows, Linux. We have that option available on Azure. So I'll over to Ujjwal just to take us through the journey of how to do that.
Thanks, Sandeep. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk about Docker quickly. So I'm going to show quickly in terms of what Microsoft has done on the Docker side. And so first of all, Docker is one of the most popular approach for virtualization, on isolating the application data and compute on shared resource. What Microsoft has done is we announced, when we first announced Docker, people have thought that it is just another container approach which have been added like libswarm or Kubernetes. But what we have essentially done is, we have not just looked through a native client support on Windows, but also have added Azure Docker extension, which uses Linux extension to create Docker VMs on the cloud very quickly. So I'm going to do a brief demo on this very, very quickly and what we have done so far, of late. So if you go ahead, by default, if you want to create a Docker, you would have to create a Linux VM and then install Docker onto a running Linux VM on top of it to make it work. But what I'm going to quickly show you is, something very interesting. So just I've logged into my portal and I'm going to do a very quick show of what is available now. So if you just search for Docker, Ubuntu, Docker, let me just search for Docker. So basically, if you go this, find it, you will find Docker and other pre-installed VMs out there. But then very interestingly, we also have Docker on Ubuntu server. This is right now in preview, but this is one very interesting stuff because now we don't have to really think through in terms of creating how a Docker environment can be created to move your applications. Rather than you can just focus on the dev part of the developer ops and not just focus on the ops part. So a very few stuff which you need to add on, like just to save time, I've already added host name and all that stuff, and I've already created one virtual machine with Docker, which is running out here. So you can see UK Docker Ubuntu 1. This is already running out. What I'm going to do is quickly connect to the server and show you with SSH. So there are two options. You have SSH and the host name and user ID and password which you can use. So I'm just going to go ahead and connect to this machine. Right, this connected. I'm going to go ahead and run Docker very, very quickly, just to show you how it functions. Just the part which is already installed. Yep, and I'm going to go ahead and zoom it to show you. This is really working. So you have the hello world from Docker running right away. So this is like, instead of creating the environment and then moving stuff later on, you can just focus on this whole thing which I've done in multiple clicks can be automated as well. With one single click, you can actually install. So from dev perspective, it's very easy and to get started. Thank you. Thanks. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thanks, Ujjwal. Electric work in terms of keeping yourself warm. Okay. Now talking about the contribution part. End of the day, we've been working with over 200 open source bodies as well as working groups to make an impact in terms of making sure two things. One is we're able to integrate that open source technology in our software, as well as enable integration for the application that's been built. So both protocol as well as data formats need to be supported. So working aggressively on that front. So it's not about just open, right? It's beyond the source, honestly, because our experience of enabling the softwares is immense. So we're actually contributing back in terms of what's working, what's not working. There is significant contribution in terms of evolving the open source community itself. Now this kind of sums up in terms of why we're doing what we're doing, why we have changed as a company, why we're embracing open source, right? End of the day, it's clear. It is about giving you an environment which is familiar, productive, and make sure you're successful on that environment. That's the Uber goal. So the last thing I want to say is, as Microsoft, you definitely would have heard us say many things in terms of a mission. One thing we've done, in fact, every great company has an enduring mission, right? So one thing we've done is we've challenged ourselves in that. And if you look at the statement here, we'll empower every person, organization to be successful on this planet. Now, it has a lot of meaning to it. I think as a company, we have the ability to harmonize needs of individuals and companies. That's where we're heading. End of the developers rule. Developers are the rock stars, honestly, because they make or break the software, right? So, and our strategy is very simple: offer best-in-class platform, and our ambition is something which we want to literally fulfill to ensure that we realize the mission, and it's very clear in that context. Now, I've spoken for the last 30-35 minutes. We have some demos as well, but we feel it in terms of how we're changing. The example of Hug Innovations I gave initially in terms of, as a company, if we had to be so agile to somebody who's nobody today, right? So when we spoke to Hug Innovations, they were a small startup in Hyderabad, 3-people company, and they came out with an ask saying, hey, can you do this for us? And product team turned around with a solution which is going to be soon put as an offering in the cloud, as an option in terms of a processor. That was agility to me. That was true transformation. And end of the day, your infrastructure, right? It's purely a function of time, because if you look at data centers today, it might be your data center or a co-located data center. It's definitely a mixture of little bit of everything, basically, right? Now, it may be proprietariness or it can be open source, doesn't matter, but it's a mix of everything. And the question that customers ask us is, if we embrace cloud, is it a one-way traffic? Is it this or that? How does hybrid workloads run there? How does economics work out? I think we are spending significant time as a company to educate customers on what's in it for them in the cloud, right? Awareness is critical. More than that, it's a question of what they can bet on, right? If something is working really well, why should they choose cloud? I think that's where a lot of work has gone into ensuring that we do the right things for the customers and partners. And quickly, so I said this term, at your terms, yes, you have a choice. You have a choice to adopt, you have a choice to change, and that doesn't go away in terms of we giving you a platform. When I say open, flexible platform, it truly stands for that. Now, this is something which I'm not sure how many of you sense that now. So I've spoken for about 40 minutes. I've taken you through the journey of why are we doing open source. Do you guys believe it when we put this? How many of you think so? It's also a time to, wonderful. So we got some work to do. I think it's 50%. So Balaji, my colleague who's sitting here, he heads commercial software initiative at Microsoft. So we work together on this journey to ensure that we spread awareness. End of the day, a lot of stuff is purely lack of awareness. So much of stuff we're doing in the open source world, so our effort is on. The reason that why we're here is today to educate you and increase awareness. So we'll be on it. We got some work to be done. But thank you so much for those guys who said yes. I think it's literally 50% of you. So that gives us some solace end of the day that, hey, there are people who know what we're doing. Thank you so much.